I'm Chloe Hope, 33, and I built a defense-grade cybersecurity system in my basement that ended up selling for $47 million. For years, I showed up for my family, paid bills, kept the peace, even let their insults slide. But when they called me a deadbeat at a wedding I paid to attend, I made a decision that changed everything. Ever been written off by the people you bent over backwards for? Drop your story in the comments, you're not the only one. Before I dive in, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to prove your worth in silence, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about boundaries, resilience, and quiet revenge. Because what happened next, you won't see coming. My name is Chloe Hope, and for most of my adult life, my family treated me like a punchline they couldn't wait to retire. I was the one who didn't quite fit, the one who chose to study engineering when they were expecting another law degree or MBA to add to the family group chat. When they bragged about us to neighbors, my name came with a footnote. She's in tech, they'd say, with the same tone someone might use for, she's still finding herself. What they didn't say was that I had graduated top of my class at Carnegie Mellon, finished a master's at MIT, and built a prototype for a cybersecurity platform that later caught the attention of a federal contractor. But none of that mattered at Thanksgiving when my brother talked about his firm going public and my sister casually mentioned an upcoming trial with a senator's son as her client. I was always the one on the folding chair at family gatherings, always the one bringing a bottle of wine instead of a story my parents could boast about. My brother Josh had a corner office in Manhattan by 26. My sister Claire, a litigation star before 30. Me? I was coding 12 hours a day in a basement I rented beneath someone else's home because it was cheap, dark, and quiet. The first few years after grad school were just that: isolation, prototypes, bug testing, and pitch decks. I called it my deep work era. My family called it Chloe's hermit phase. The truth is, I didn't mind the solitude. I liked the control. Building something from scratch, just me, a laptop, and lines of logic that, if stitched together right, could do something remarkable. The core idea came to me during a government-funded research seminar on predictive network security. Everyone else was focused on reactive models, find the intrusion, close the door. I wanted to build a system that could learn behavioral patterns and cut the intruder off before the first knock. Anticipatory shielding, we called it. By the time I left the lab, I knew I hadn't just found a thesis. I'd found the kind of idea that could change things. But to my family, all they saw was someone who had been out of college for 6 years and still didn't own a car. I still showed up to birthdays and holidays. Still answered the same exhausting questions about whether I had considered teaching or thought about joining a real company. When Claire made partner at her firm, my parents rented out a private room at a high-end restaurant. When I filed my first provisional patent, my mother asked if I could help her reset her Facebook password. I did. Then I paid the bill after my father realized he'd left his wallet at home. Again. At some point, I stopped expecting anything different. I told myself I didn't need their approval. But there was always a part of me that felt like I was carrying a secret, like if they knew what I was really building, if they understood how serious it had become, maybe they'd stop talking to me like I was 12 and start listening. But explaining what I did was exhausting. It always led to glazed expressions and awkward silences. Once, at a family dinner, my uncle asked me what my startup actually did. I gave him the simplest version. We're building cybersecurity infrastructure that proactively identifies and neutralizes zero-day threats using a behavior-based model. He blinked twice and said, "So, like antivirus?" I nodded. "Sure, like antivirus." After a while, I stopped trying. Most of my days were consumed with code. I didn't have time for self-pity or resentment. I barely had time to eat. I was funding everything with contract work, bug bounties, audit reports, and the occasional white hat assignment for small tech firms. I ate canned beans, reused coffee grounds, and watched my savings shrink month by month. But the system was learning. Every day, it got a little faster, a little smarter. By the second year, I had something that could map out network behavior and flag suspicious patterns before they even triggered alerts in traditional software. I called it Argus, named after the all-seeing giant from Greek mythology. I remember the night it caught its first live intrusion. I was running a simulation for a private firm's internal network. Nothing special, just an overnight stress test. At 3:12 a.m., the system flagged a sequence of packet transmissions that didn't match the established user behavior. I manually reviewed it, and sure enough, it was a probe. Quiet, sophisticated, and likely unnoticed by the company's existing software. I sent them a report. The next morning, the CTO called me directly. Said their head of IT was stunned. Wanted to know what I was using. I told him it was something I'd built myself. He asked for a demo. That was the first real signal I wasn't imagining the value here. I began pitching to people I trusted, former professors, connections from my internship days, anyone with a tie to national security or defense. Most listened politely and never called back. But a few asked the right questions. One of them, a retired intelligence officer turned consultant, told me plainly, "This isn't startup material. This is contract grade. If it scales, you're not looking at VC money. You're looking at federal acquisition." The problem was, if it scales, was a massive if. The architecture needed rebuilding. The learning model was inefficient. I had a stack of ideas, a functional prototype, and no team. No funding. No one who could help me take it beyond proof of concept. And my landlord had just warned me that the rent on my basement unit was going up. Again. I thought about quitting more than once. Thought about selling off the code and getting a stable job with someone else's company. Something with a badge and health insurance. But every time I looked at Argus's logs, every time I saw another anomaly flagged, I knew walking away would haunt me. So I stayed. In the basement. In the dark. My parents called every now and then, mostly to ask if I'd made any progress with that app thing. I stopped correcting them. I told them I was doing fine. They told me they were worried I'd wasted the best years of my life in front of a screen. I told them I had it under control. I didn't tell them that I'd eaten rice and lentils for 3 days straight, or that my internet got cut off once because I forgot to pay the bill. They wouldn't have understood. But something kept me going. Maybe it was spite. Maybe it was belief. Maybe it was the stubborn refusal to be remembered as the one who never quite figured it out. Whatever it was, I kept building. By the time I turned 29, I had a functional demo that ran on 3 servers in my closet, a revised architecture that could support national-scale implementation, and a 60-page white paper ready for pitch. I'd sent cold emails to every contact I could find at DARPA, NSA, and a half-dozen military contractors. One responded. He asked for a meeting. I wore the only blazer I owned and took the subway into DC. I didn't tell my family. Not because I wanted to surprise them, but because I knew deep down they'd just tell me not to get my hopes up. They would have called it another basement fantasy. But I knew better. Argus was about to change everything. They just didn't know it yet. By the time I landed the beta testing contract with a mid-tier defense contractor, I thought, naively, that things might finally shift with my family. It wasn't the CIA. It wasn't life-changing money. But it was a real contract with real national security implications and a confidentiality clause that, for once, made it easier not to share the details. Not that they would have asked. I told my mom in passing during a Sunday brunch at Claire's place. Just a quiet, casual mention that a company aligned with national defense had taken interest in my software and was rolling it out in a limited-use pilot. She nodded, barely looking up from her mimosa. "That's nice," she said. "Did you bring those quinoa bites again?" Claire turned to Josh and asked if he was still planning on moving into the loft in Tribeca. That was the end of the conversation. They didn't ask for details. Didn't ask what the contract entailed or what kind of software it was. They didn't ask about Argus or the years I'd put into it. It was as if I'd told them I'd found a new knitting hobby. Interesting, but irrelevant. I tried to let it go. I told myself it didn't matter. That I wasn't doing this for validation. But something about their silence made it worse than outright criticism. The comments started small but precise, like paper cuts. "Still working on your little app?" my Uncle Tom asked at Thanksgiving. He said it with a grin, like it was a joke we were both in on. I forced a smile and nodded. Claire snorted into her wine. "You should talk to my firm's IT guy. He might have something more stable for you." My mom chimed in, trying to be helpful in that way she always thought was nurturing. You'd make a great assistant at Darren's firm. He's always looking for bright young people with a good attitude. She said it like it was a compliment. That winter, they hosted a New Year's Eve party at my parents' house. Extended family, neighbors, a few old friends. I found out the morning after when my cousin posted pictures online. When I texted my mom and asked why I hadn't been invited, she responded with, "Oh, sweetheart, it was really last minute. We didn't think you'd want to drive in the snow." I lived 30 minutes away. The roads were dry. By spring, Josh had stopped responding to texts altogether. I'd ask if he wanted to grab a coffee, or if he could put me in touch with someone in his network. No reply. The only time he reached out was when he needed help resetting his router. Claire, meanwhile, would occasionally swing by my place unannounced, always in between something. Pilates, a deposition, a wine tasting. She'd glance around my apartment like she was doing market research on poverty. "I could never live like this," she said once, flicking a chipped corner of my countertop. "How do you not lose your mind in all this beige?" It was never a question. Just a judgment in the shape of one. My building was old, and yes, the paint was peeling in a few spots, but it was clean, paid for, and quiet. That was all I needed. Around that same time, I got a notice from the contractor. Argus had flagged a possible breach during their audit simulation. Their internal team verified it was a real vulnerability, one they hadn't caught. I received an encrypted message from their liaison 2 days later, asking for a secure call. The tone had shifted. I could tell. They were taking it seriously now. It was the first external validation I'd ever received. But I had no one to share it with. No one who would understand. I tried again, once more, at a family dinner in early April. The pilot had been extended, and I'd been invited to attend a classified seminar at Quantico. I wasn't allowed to share details, but I mentioned the travel, the clearance process, the NDA. My dad gave me a tired look and said, "Just make sure you're not getting scammed." Then he turned to Josh. "How's that IPO looking?" "Still on track for Q3. No one asked where Quantico was. No one asked what my software did." A week later, I overheard them talking in the kitchen when they thought I'd stepped outside to take a call. My parents. Claire. Josh. Low voices, but clear enough through the thin walls. "She's wasting her prime years," my mother said. "It's sad, honestly." "She's brilliant," Claire added. "But so delusional. It's like she's addicted to struggling." "Who chooses this?" "I just hope she snaps out of it before it's too late," Josh muttered. "Too late for what? I don't know." I stood there in the hallway, holding my phone like an idiot, letting the silence settle around me. I didn't interrupt. Didn't storm in. Just let their words land, one by one. And I remember thinking, this wasn't new. This wasn't even surprising. It was just the first time they said it out loud. After that, I stopped offering updates. I still showed up when I was invited. I still brought gifts. I still helped Mom log back into her Gmail when she got locked out. But I stopped trying to explain what I was building. If they wanted to believe I was chasing some pointless dream in a basement, I let them. The truth wasn't going to matter until it couldn't be ignored. In May, I received a formal request for a second beta phase, this time with a larger network and increased sensitivity settings. A line item in the briefing noted that Argus had outperformed 2 industry-standard firewalls in threat detection. The company asked if I'd consider licensing the tech or if I was pursuing a government bid. I told them I was still deciding. I didn't tell my family. I knew what they'd say. Something like, "Don't put all your eggs in one basket," or "Just make sure you're not doing anything illegal." At my cousin Leah's wedding, they placed me at the table with the teenagers and the elderly. The in-between zone. Josh made a toast that name-dropped both his hedge fund and his Tesla. Claire wore a watch that probably cost more than my entire dev stack. When someone asked what I did, Josh answered before I could. "She's between things right now. Some kind of tech startup." He smiled like it was a joke. Later that night, Claire cornered me by the bar. She looked genuinely concerned, in the way that only someone completely detached from your reality can manage. "Chloe," she said, swirling her drink. "Don't waste your prime years on this. You're smart. You're pretty. You could do anything." I didn't reply, just nodded and excused myself. Back at home, I opened my laptop, pulled up the most recent logs. Argus had intercepted 2 attempts at internal phishing within the last hour. Real threats. Real value. I watched the data cascade down the screen. Clean, predictable, and responsive. Everything my family wasn't. They thought I was floundering. But Argus was watching. And I was getting ready. It happened at Leah's wedding. By then, I knew better than to expect much from family events, but I still tried. I flew in early, booked my own hotel instead of staying at the block Claire had reserved for the rest of the family, and bought a navy blue designer dress on clearance that I absolutely couldn't afford. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I didn't want to give them more ammunition. The ceremony was held at some sprawling estate upstate, all manicured hedges and tented reception areas lined with glass chandeliers. Claire was a bridesmaid. Josh was on some kind of planning committee. I wasn't in the wedding, but I got an invitation late, with my name misspelled, but an invitation all the same. When I arrived, the hostess couldn't find my place card. I stood by the check-in table in heels that already hurt while the intern staffing the guest list made 3 calls. Eventually, they scribbled my name on a blank card and said, "We'll seat you with extended family." You're not in the group photo, right? I wasn't. That had been taken the day before, apparently. No one told me. I found my table, just far enough from the main floor to feel peripheral, and sat down between Aunt Cindy and a man I didn't recognize who spent most of dinner scrolling through his phone. The wine helped, but not much. Josh spotted me halfway through the cocktail hour. He was in a tailored gray suit, drink in hand, his hair freshly cut the way he always had it before a major presentation. He walked over with 2 men from his firm, both younger and louder than he was. "This is my sister," he said. "She's between things right now. Some software stuff." They smiled politely. One nodded like he understood, though I could tell he didn't. Josh didn't make eye contact with me as he said it, just turned back to them and started talking about quarterly forecasts. I laughed under my breath. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictably on brand. Later, at dinner, the microphone passed to my mom. She stood beside Leah's father, her wine glass raised. "We're just so proud," she said. "Of Leah, of course, and of all our children who've made such incredible progress these past few years." She glanced toward Josh, then Claire. "We've got a lawyer, a hedge fund manager, and, well, plenty of talent in this family." That was it. I wasn't mentioned by name. Not even a vague nod in my direction. I sat there, smile frozen, fingers tightening around the stem of my glass. Claire clapped. Josh clapped. I took a long sip and reminded myself I'd only committed to staying 2 nights. After the speeches, while people began dancing and the waitstaff cleared plates, I heard it. A woman at the next table, someone I didn't recognize, maybe a cousin's friend, leaned in to whisper, "Isn't she the deadbeat one? The coder?" I didn't react. Just kept my eyes on the dance floor, where Claire was twirling a flower girl in a circle. I told myself it didn't matter. That she didn't know me. That the word didn't mean anything. But it did. It wasn't just the word. It was the casual way she said it, like it was common knowledge. Like it had been said before. I stayed until the end. Hugged Leah. Thanked her parents. When the valet brought my rental car around, I climbed in, drove back to the hotel, and sat in the parking lot for 10 full minutes before going inside. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just sat there, thinking about the years I had poured into building something they refused to even acknowledge. The next morning was brunch at the hotel restaurant. A final wrap-up for the family, hosted by Leah's parents. I got there early mostly because I hadn't slept. Ordered coffee and offered to pick up the tab for the table when the server came by. I was trying to be generous. Trying to be part of things. But Mom caught me before I could hand over my card. "Don't embarrass yourself," she said quietly, her voice low but firm. "You should be saving what little you have." What little I have. I looked at her, really looked. Her tailored blazer, the gold watch she only wore to formal events, the makeup she hadn't changed in 20 years. She thought she was protecting me. Or maybe she just didn't want me to step out of place. I nodded. Said nothing. Sat through brunch and let someone else pay. But something in me cracked. It wasn't just that they didn't believe in what I was doing. It was that they didn't care to ask. Didn't even think it was worth a conversation. My brother could gamble someone else's money in the market and be called brilliant. My sister could argue corporate liability cases and be celebrated. I had built a product from the ground up, signed a government pilot, and was still treated like someone who'd just graduated without a plan. That afternoon, I skipped the family photos. Skipped the after party. Went back to my hotel room, opened my laptop, and responded to the liaison from the contractor. Told him I was ready to talk licensing. Told him I had an idea for a scaled-down civilian prototype. Told him I wanted to meet in person. He responded within the hour. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my family was still laughing over wedding cake, I was locking in the meeting that would eventually lead to the biggest conversation of my life. But that day, all I had was the silence. And the word that kept echoing in my head. Deadbeat. They wouldn't be laughing for long. I flew home early the next morning. No goodbye hugs, no group photo, no brunch recap. I didn't text anyone to say I was leaving. Just packed my things, checked out of the hotel, and drove straight to the airport. It felt like leaving the scene of a bad play, one where I'd been cast as the silent extra in my own family's narrative. The flight back was half empty. I sat by the window and stared out at the wing as the plane rose over the cloud line, wondering if any of them even noticed I was gone. If they did, I knew exactly what the conversation would sound like. She left without saying anything? Well, maybe she couldn't afford another night. Honestly, I worry about her. It's just not a real life, what she's doing. When I landed, I didn't call anyone. I didn't check in. I took a cab home, climbed the stairs to my apartment, and stood in the middle of my living room without taking my shoes off. I looked around at the whiteboard leaning against the far wall, still covered in scribbled pseudocode and network logic. Next to it, a printout of the feedback report from the contractor's second beta test. Redacted, heavily annotated, but buried in all the jargon was one clean sentence. Argus successfully isolated a simulated zero-day exploit in 2.3 seconds. No false positives. No escalation needed. I dropped my keys on the table and sat cross-legged on the floor, still in the dress pants I'd worn on the flight. The apartment was quiet, too quiet after a weekend of ambient music, clinking glasses, and thinly veiled insults. I leaned my head back against the couch and closed my eyes, just listening to the hum of my desktop's cooling fan and the faint buzz of the refrigerator down the hall. Then I picked up my phone and called Marcus. He answered on the second ring. Back already? Yeah, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Couldn't take another round of pity compliments. Let me guess, he said. They're still trying to figure out how you ended up like this. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Marcus had known me since college. He was 5 years older, former Marine turned cybersecurity consultant who took night classes while holding down 2 jobs. We'd met during a lab project. He was the only one who actually read the protocol in advance. When I told him what I was working on, he didn't blink. He asked about architecture, about latency, about failover logic. He didn't care that I worked out of a basement or that I had no formal company structure. He cared that it worked. You don't need their approval, he said that night, like he could hear the weight I was still carrying. You've got the government's attention. That's louder. I laughed, but it came out thin. Not sure my mom would agree. She doesn't have clearance, he said. She doesn't get a vote. I hung up a little lighter. That night, I cleaned the kitchen for the first time in weeks. Wiped down the counters, threw out the expired almond milk, rearranged my tangled mess of Post-it notes. I didn't realize how much I'd let things slide. When your only source of validation is internal, it's easy to live like the outside world doesn't exist. But things were starting to change. I pulled out my notebook and reviewed my task list. There were still open items, code refactors I hadn't finished, documentation for the licensing proposal, a pitch deck I hadn't updated in months. I hadn't touched LinkedIn in almost a year. My GitHub was outdated. Everything public was stale. Because none of it mattered. The people I was talking to didn't need public portfolios. They needed discretion. Half of them never even used their real names. Some only spoke through encrypted channels or temporary email accounts. I had one contact who insisted on routing everything through an overseas relay server. The calls were brief, the questions sharp, and the expectations high. But they kept calling. And that was all I needed to keep going. I stopped checking in with my family. No more update texts. No more awkward Sunday calls where I'd pretend everything was fine just to avoid the inevitable career advice. I let it all go. Let them believe I was stuck. Let them believe I was failing. It made things simpler. The truth is, I didn't need them to understand the code. I just wanted them to care that I wrote it. But once I stopped needing that, everything got easier. I poured myself into the next build. I overhauled Argus's scanning logic, shaved milliseconds off the response time, and started integrating passive data fingerprinting into the behavioral model. I was working 16-hour days, running tests on 3 separate machines, and documenting every change in a locked, local-only version control repo. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't wondering if it would be worth it. Because I knew it already was. The next call came a week later. A government representative, not the contractor, not a liaison, but a direct inquiry. They wanted a private demonstration. No promises, no details, just a secure environment, a time slot, and a non-negotiable location. I forwarded it to Marcus. He called me 10 minutes later. "This is it," he said. "This is where the game changes." He didn't say congratulations. He didn't say I told you so. He just said, "Be ready." So I was. I booked a flight, made a backup of everything encrypted on a physical drive, and printed 2 copies of the proposal, one clean, one annotated with specs and back-end logic trees. I stayed up 3 nights in a row running simulations, then slept for 10 hours straight the night before the trip. When I walked into that building with a badge that didn't have my name on it, holding a demo that didn't officially exist, I wasn't nervous. I was focused. And I didn't think about my family once. Back at home, the text started up again. Josh sent a photo from a ski trip. Claire forwarded an article she thought I'd find interesting. It was about burnout in female entrepreneurs. My mom left a voicemail asking if I'd be coming to Father's Day. I didn't respond. Because by then, the people calling me were using acronyms that couldn't be printed in public documents. They weren't asking about my resume. They were asking about deployment windows, API compatibility, and federal procurement timelines. They weren't asking who I was. They already knew. And that, more than anything, was the shift. I didn't need to be seen anymore. I just needed to keep building. 6 months after the NSA pilot concluded, I got the report. It was short, direct. The kind of bureaucratic language that doesn't leave much room for interpretation. Argus demonstrates unprecedented potential in real-time threat anticipation and non-disruptive mitigation. Further development and deployment recommended under secure acquisition terms. That was it. No small talk. No compliments. Just an internal memo forwarded to me by the contractor's liaison, who followed it with one sentence of his own: "You're about to get very popular." He wasn't wrong. Within the next 3 weeks, I received 2 formal acquisition proposals. One from a private defense firm based in Virginia that had a long history of quietly absorbing startups like mine and folding them into government-backed systems. And one from the CIA. The second didn't come with a letterhead. Just a secure call, followed by an encrypted document drop, followed by a non-disclosure form that had its own non-disclosure clause. Marcus and I had talked about this moment for months. We'd run through scenarios, legal structures, fallback plans, even contingencies for what to do if I decided not to sell. But when the actual numbers landed in front of me, it didn't feel like a movie moment. It felt like paperwork. My lawyer handled the negotiations. She was sharp, ruthless, and completely unimpressed by the agencies involved. That helped. It grounded everything. She walked me through every clause, every override, every long-tail equity stipulation. And the number they landed on wasn't just life-changing. It was deliberate. Strategic. $47 million. Clean. Quiet. Final. The morning the wire transfer cleared, I logged into my bank account and stared at the screen like it had glitched. I refreshed the page twice. Still there. 47 million. No decimal points missing. No extra verification codes. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't pop champagne. I sat at my kitchen table, barefoot, with a chipped mug of instant coffee and a half-charged laptop, and just stared. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like exhale. A week earlier, I had still been fielding vague texts from my mother asking if I was taking care of myself, and a group chat ping from Claire that included a screenshot of a meme about people who choose gig work over real careers. Josh hadn't said a word since Leah's wedding. But the group thread had been active with planning for my dad's retirement dinner. It was a big deal. 40 years at the same consulting firm. They'd booked a venue. Ordered personalized menu cards. Claire was organizing the slideshow. Josh was handling the seating chart. I wasn't on either list. Still, 2 days after the wire hit, my phone buzzed. A message from Claire. Hey, are you coming to Dad's dinner? You've been kind of distant. I stared at the text for a long time. I typed, no, deleted it. Typed, busy with work. Deleted that too. Eventually I wrote, hope it goes well. Tell him congrats. Then I muted the thread. Let them keep guessing. I moved into a new place quietly. Still in the same city. Still in the same neighborhood. Just a little further up the hill. More light. More windows. A dedicated workspace that didn't share a wall with my neighbor's band practice. I didn't post about it. Didn't share photos. Didn't send a change of address card. The people who needed to know already did. Everyone else could wonder. The next few months were a blur of NDAs, onboarding calls, asset transfers, and quiet exits. I dissolved my LLC. Archived the project logs. Cleared out the servers. I handed Argus off to a team that now included some of the top cyber analysts in the country. And then, just like that, it wasn't mine anymore. I thought I would feel empty. But I didn't. I felt untethered. Free in a way I hadn't even realized I wasn't. I didn't buy a car. Didn't change my wardrobe. I still wore hoodies most days, still shopped at the same grocery store. But I hired an accountant. I hired a financial advisor. And for the first time in my life, I slept without worrying about rent. That summer, while my family was posting photos from Dad's retirement gala, I flew to Oslo for a private symposium on ethical AI in defense systems. I sat on a panel next to someone who once headed up cryptographic design at a federal lab. He leaned over after my presentation and said, I've read your work. Your design is one of the cleanest I've seen in 10 years. I said thank you. Quietly. The way I'd taught myself to say it when I wanted to avoid drawing too much attention. He smiled. You should say that louder. I didn't respond. When I got back, I had a voicemail from my mom. Just her voice, a little softer than usual. Hope you're doing okay. Your brother says you've been hard to reach. Let us know if you need anything. I didn't need anything. But I did replay the message. Once. Not because I missed her. But because it sounded like she was starting to realize I wasn't failing. And I wasn't going to be the one to spell it out. Let them talk. Let them wonder. While they speculated, I was building something they'd never be able to measure. And this time, I wasn't going to shrink myself so they'd feel more comfortable around it. It started with a headline buried halfway down a tech blog that mostly covered defense contracting rumors and mid-level M&A deals. Undisclosed sale of predictive cybersecurity software to federal intelligence agencies confirmed, sources say. There was no company name. No founder mention. Just a short paragraph about a multi-million-dollar acquisition that had allegedly involved a technology built by a single founder, closed-cap prototype, with exceptional zero-day response capability. The article didn't say Argus. But it didn't have to. In the small circles I'd spent the last few years quietly orbiting, academic research groups, freelance security networks, old conference panels, it didn't take long for people to start connecting the dots. The first message came from someone I hadn't heard from in years. A guy I worked with briefly on a DARPA grant back in grad school. Hey, it said. You finally went dark mode, huh? Then another. From a former classmate, was that you in the article? Then one more, from someone I barely remembered but had apparently followed my work longer than I knew, respect. You kept your head down and did it the right way. I responded to none of them. Not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I didn't know how to explain the shape of what I'd just lived through. The years of being dismissed. The weight of silence. The loss that came not from failure, but from finally succeeding, and knowing it wasn't going to fix anything with the people who should have believed in me first. But then the text shifted. My brother was the first family member to reach out. A message, no preamble. Hey, heard something big happened. Can we catch up? No acknowledgement of the last 2 years of silence. No mention of the wedding or the brunch or the deadbeat comment he never realized I'd heard. Just a vague hand extended, now that the tide had changed. I didn't reply. 2 days later, a voicemail from Mom. Hi, sweetie. Just checking in. We've missed you. You know your father always brags about you. He tells everyone you're the tech genius of the family. Hope everything's going well. I played it twice. Not because I needed to hear it again, but because I needed to be absolutely sure I hadn't imagined the tone shift. This was the same woman who once told me not to embarrass myself by offering to pick up brunch. The same woman who offered me her old sheets when I moved into my first apartment because, as she put it, you don't need anything fancy. Now they missed me. Now Dad always bragged. Right. The same dad who once told me, during a family dinner I hadn't even wanted to attend, that I should think about settling down and that I'd missed my window if I wasn't careful. Just marry someone smart with a job in finance, he said, half joking. Let him figure things out for a while. I'd laughed then, not because it was funny, but because there was no safe way to say what I was actually thinking. That I was already building something smarter than half the finance sector. That I didn't need to marry into someone else's future. I was too busy constructing my own. Now, suddenly, I was the one he bragged about. I let the voicemail sit there. Didn't delete it. Didn't respond. Let them feel the silence for once. Let them sit in the same uncertainty I'd lived in for years, wondering if the problem was theirs to solve, or if they'd already missed their chance. Claire waited another week. Then she sent a message that was surprisingly short. Just, heard something. If it's true, congrats. Seriously. That was the first time in years she'd said anything without a trace of sarcasm or superiority. I stared at the message for a while. It wasn't enough to erase everything, but I could feel the shift. They weren't just guessing anymore. They knew. Or at least they were pretty sure. And they were trying to figure out what came next. What came next was something they weren't invited to. The CIA acquisition, even with its redactions and restrictions, came with a quiet wave of credibility. Not the kind you post on LinkedIn. The kind that shows up in your inbox with no subject line and a classified extension. The kind where your name suddenly appears off record, in rooms where people don't ask for resumes. A week later, I was asked to consult on an interagency strategy group focused on scalable threat response. Just a temporary role. No title. No direct attribution. But the people in that room, they knew who I was. They treated me like someone who mattered. Someone who had built something that could hold the line. No one in my family ever asked about that part. They were still stuck somewhere between "we're proud of you" and "we don't quite understand what you do." Which was fine. I wasn't building for them anymore. I bought a new apartment. Quiet neighborhood. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A view I didn't need, but wanted. For once, I didn't have to ask anyone for help moving. I hired professionals. Paid cash. Upgraded my server hardware. Installed fiber. Didn't post about it. Didn't share the address. Let them assume I was still in that basement apartment with the beige walls and the flickering overhead light. In the mornings, I worked on a side project, nothing commercial, just R&D. Something I'd been toying with since my second year of building Argus. In the afternoons, I took meetings with people who used to politely ignore my emails. Now they listened carefully. Jotted notes. Offered contracts I didn't need. One day, while reviewing an API spec for a NATO-adjacent briefing, I got a text from Josh. Can I call you? Something I want to run by you security-related. No apology. No preamble. Just straight to business. I didn't respond. Because what they never understood, and what I no longer felt obligated to explain, is that I didn't get lucky. I didn't stumble into some fluke opportunity. I earned it, one ignored call at a time. One dismissed idea. One insult disguised as a joke. Every eye roll, every snub, every dinner where they talked over me like I wasn't even there, it all became kindling. They gave me silence, and I learned how to build without an audience. Now, they wanted to break the silence on their terms. But I wasn't answering yet. Not out of spite. Not out of ego. Out of clarity. The shift had already happened. They just hadn't realized they were no longer part of the story. Eventually, I agreed to meet. It wasn't some grand reconciliation. No dramatic call. No tears. Just a quiet email from my mother that said, "We'd love to see you. Maybe lunch sometime?" No pressure. It had been over a year since we'd spoken face to face. The acquisition had long since closed. The article had circulated. The calls had come and gone. But this was the first real invitation that didn't come with guilt or an agenda buried under small talk. I said yes. One lunch. Neutral ground. A cafe downtown they used to tease me for frequenting back when I couldn't afford dinner anywhere that didn't serve food on a tray. Now it was Claire's pick, apparently. Quiet and nice, she said in the group text she started for planning. Like she hadn't once joked that the booths there smelled like failure. I arrived 2 minutes early. Not on purpose. Just a habit now, being prepared. They were already seated when I walked in. My mom smiled too wide when she saw me. Claire stood and leaned in like we were close. Josh offered a nod and a handshake like this was a business lunch. No one mentioned the silence. Or the texts that went unanswered. Or the missed holidays. They just launched straight into the performance. "You look great," Claire said, like that could patch over 3 years of snide remarks and side-eyes. Josh flagged down the server and started talking about the menu like this was something we did all the time. Mom reached across the table and touched my wrist, just for a second. "I'm so glad you came." I let them go through it. The small talk. The questions that weren't really questions. The references to things they assumed I knew about. Remember Cousin Greg's dog? Did you hear about the office merger? That influencer you liked got canceled. I listened. I nodded. I waited. Then, just after the drinks arrived, Josh shifted gears. "So," he said, "you probably already know this, but I've been working on a fintech platform. Mostly early stage stuff, but we're getting traction. I've been meaning to ask, could you take a look at our infrastructure? Just from a security angle. Nothing formal. Just your thoughts." There it was. The ask. It always came, eventually. I took a sip of coffee and glanced at Claire. She looked everywhere but at me. Mom was busy adjusting her napkin. "I'm not consulting right now," I said. "Taking a break from client work." Josh nodded slowly. "Totally. Of course. Just thought I'd ask." And then silence. Real silence. Not the kind they used to fill with lectures or sarcasm or pity. The kind they weren't used to sitting in. I let it stay quiet for a beat longer. Then I said it, not like a mic drop, not like a speech. Just a clear, level truth. "I'm happy. And I'm not looking to fix anything. Just setting the record straight." Mom blinked. Claire shifted. Josh looked down at his fork like it had suddenly become very interesting. "I don't need anything from anyone here," I continued. "I'm not angry. I'm not trying to rehash the past. But I also won't pretend it didn't happen." Still no one said anything. So I offered them an out. "I'm fine meeting. I'm fine catching up. But not if the cost is pretending we didn't spend years talking around each other." I didn't mean for it to sound harsh. And maybe it didn't. Maybe it just sounded final. Claire cleared her throat. "Well, I think it's amazing what you've done. Truly. We've all been impressed. Impressed. Not proud. Not supportive. Just impressed, like I was a distant figure in an article, not the sister they once called a deadbeat." Josh nodded. "Yeah, you were ahead of your time." That part almost made me laugh. Like they'd known all along and were just waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. But I didn't push it. I didn't need them to rewrite history. I just needed them to stop pretending it hadn't happened. Mom reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. "This is silly," she said. "But your father wanted to send this. It's just a note. He's not good with words, but he means well." I didn't open it. I said thank you and slipped it into my bag without looking at it. Whatever it said, it wouldn't change anything. But maybe it was a start. Or maybe it was just another attempt at closure that didn't require accountability. We paid separately. I made sure of it. As we stood to leave, Claire tried one more time. Let's not wait so long next time. I nodded. Not a yes, just a nod. We walked out onto the street together, then went our separate ways without a photo or a plan. Later that night, I opened the envelope. It was a short note in my dad's handwriting. Just 4 sentences. The last one read, "You were always going to be the one who surprised us." No apology. No ownership. But it was the first time he'd ever put something like that in writing. I didn't respond. Because this wasn't about whether they were sorry. It was about me finally understanding I didn't need them to be. What I needed was distance. And clarity. And peace. And now that I had all 3, I wasn't giving them up, not even for a family that finally decided to look at me when the rest of the world already had. They didn't have to like my boundaries. But they were going to learn how to live with them. On my terms. Not theirs. A year later, I live in a quiet brownstone in DC. The kind of place with creaky floors and thick windows and just enough space to feel like I can breathe. I found it through a friend, an old NSA contact who knew a realtor who specialized in privacy-first properties. Not listed online. No open house. Just a front porch, a working fireplace, and neighbors who mind their own business. I consult when I feel like it. Not often. Just enough to keep my head sharp. Most of my time now goes into mentoring women in cybersecurity, girls just entering computer science, veterans transitioning into tech roles. The kind of people no one notices until they do something big. I know what that feels like. I know how much time you lose trying to prove your worth to people who can't see it unless it's backed by a logo or a check. So I make sure they don't have to wait that long. Once a month, I teach a workshop on digital infrastructure resilience for a nonprofit that partners with underfunded schools. No cameras. No press. Just a whiteboard and a room full of people who actually want to learn. It's the most satisfying thing I do. My family still doesn't fully understand what I do. But they've stopped trying to explain it for me. They ask before they visit. They don't show up unannounced. They bring their own wallets to lunch. No more jokes about freelancer phases or app ideas. No more whispered comments about wasted potential. Claire still sends me articles sometimes, mostly about other women in tech. It's her way of connecting, I think. She doesn't say much beyond "thought of you when I read this." I let it be enough. Josh hasn't brought up his startup again. Not since I turned down the quick favor and didn't offer an apology for it. But last Christmas, he mailed me a book on cybersecurity ethics with a note inside that said, "For when you're bored." It was the first gift he's ever given me that didn't come with a punchline. Mom plays it safe now. She asks how I'm sleeping, what I'm eating, if I've been traveling. She talks around the work. Pretends not to be intimidated by what little she knows. I let her. It's easier that way. Dad never brought up the letter. Never mentioned whether he knew I'd read it or just assumed it got tossed. But when I saw him at Thanksgiving, he introduced me to a friend from his old firm and said, "This is my daughter. She's a specialist in federal systems security." That was it. No awkward qualifiers. No vague jokes. No dismissive tone. Just the title. Spoken plainly. Like it belonged to me. Because it does. These days, I take my coffee on the back patio. No phone. No news. Just 15 minutes to myself before I open the laptop and decide whether or not I want to work. It still feels strange sometimes. Having nothing to prove. No one breathing down my neck. No clock to punch. But I've learned to stop filling silence with justification. Not everything has to be explained. I kept the whiteboard from the old apartment. It's in the office now, cleaned off, but still framed with the same black tape around the edges. I like seeing it there. A reminder of where this started. A symbol of the time when no one else saw what I did. When I had to build something invisible before anyone believed it was real. People ask me sometimes, usually younger women, how I stayed motivated when no one believed in the work. I tell them the truth. You don't always stay motivated. You just stay building. And eventually, if you do it long enough, the silence starts to speak for you. I haven't spoken publicly about the sale. There's no press release. No interviews. I turned down the profiles. Turned down the keynote invitations. Not because I'm hiding, just because I don't need the performance. The work speaks for itself now. Every once in a while, someone in the industry will reference the undisclosed Argus build. They'll speculate on what made it so effective, how a solo founder managed to outperform multi-million-dollar teams. I never confirm or deny anything. I just listen, sip my drink, move on. I like it better that way. I don't need to be the face of anything. I've already become the proof. Last month, I was on a panel, closed door, invite only. A woman across the table, former military, brilliant mind, asked me if I'd ever been underestimated early on. I smiled. Took a while for people to understand what I was doing, I said. But I got there. She nodded. Said, that's the good kind of win. The quiet kind. She was right. Because the best kind of revenge isn't loud. It's not a confrontation. It's not a dramatic speech at a family gathering or a LinkedIn post that goes viral. It's a shift in gravity. It's the moment when the people who once dismissed you have to recalculate everything because the world decided you mattered, even if they still don't understand why. It's sitting at a dinner table while they tread carefully, not because you asked them to, but because they finally learned you won't tolerate anything less. It's living a life you don't have to defend. And walking into rooms you once only dreamed of, knowing you earned every inch of space without needing to raise your voice. They used to call me the deadbeat. Now they call before they call. And when someone from the old days slips up, makes a joke, repeats the story, drops the word, I just smile. Because I know better. And because my bank account, my peace, and my silence say everything I need to. 47 million reasons to never explain myself again. Thanks for watching. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family? Or had someone suddenly come around only after you proved them wrong? Let me know in the comments. I read everyone. And if you're building something no one believes in yet, keep going. Hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs a reminder. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your success.